Follow along, Catholic Pilgrims, as we follow French doctor of the Church, St. Francis de Sales, through his book, Introduction to the Devout Life. Tune in as we read through this practical guide for living out the Catholic faith well. Hello, Catholic Pilgrims. Thank you for pressing play and joining me. When we start out on the path to become more devoted to Christ and our faith, we usually have to leave a lot of things behind. We realize that we need to shed certain sins that have become habitual, and in our new fervor, we initially find that very easy to do. Then, however, those old temptations may start to creep back up into our minds. We used to like those sins and those vices that once gripped us, and the devil is always whispering that it might not be so bad to go back to them just for a little bit, just this once. But we must have courage to say no. St. Francis is going to remind us that we must be of good courage. So let's turn in our books to chapter 2 of the fourth part. Chapter 2. We must be of good courage. However much our eyes may admire and seek the light, they will be dazzled by it after having been long in darkness. And before we become familiar with the inhabitants of a strange land, we shall find subjects of astonishment, however courteous and agreeable they may be. It is very probable that you will have sundry inward struggles in the course of your altered life, and that having taken a thorough farewell of the follies and inanities of the world, you will have some sad and discouraging feelings. If so, only be patient. They will come to nothing. They are but the result of novelty, and once conquered, you will receive endless consolations. Perhaps at first, you will be sorry to lose the glory which you earned in your vanity from the frivolous men of the world. But would you exchange for that the eternal glory which God will surely give you? Those idle pleasures and amusements in which your past years were spent will arise before you, tempting your heart to return to them. But have you courage to forfeit an eternity of bliss for such deceitful trifles? Believe me, with perseverance you will not fail to receive such deeply delicious and heartfelt satisfactions, that you will own the world offers you only gall as compared with this honey, and that one day of devotion is worth more than 1,000 years of worldly gratification. But as you gaze upon the steep mountain of Christian perfection, alas, you exclaim, how shall I ever ascend it? Be of good cheer. When the young bees begin to take their form, they are called nymphs, and are unable to fly to the neighboring flowers or hills and valleys in search of honey. But by degrees, being fed with the honey provided for them, these little nymphs acquire wings and grow strong enough to fly everywhere in quest of honey. We are as yet but nymphs in devotion, and cannot mount up as we would, for we would fain attain to the summit of Christian perfection. But we are gradually being formed by our desires and resolutions. Our wings are beginning to grow, and so one day we may hope to be perfected and mount upwards. Meanwhile, let us feed upon the honey of those pious instructions left to us by holy men of old, and let us beseech God to give us the wings of the dove, so that we may not only fly in this present life, but also find our rest in the eternity of that which is to come. After the age of 16, I could pretty much watch whatever I wanted. My mom had been a stickler for trying to monitor a lot of what I watched when I was below the age of 16. She especially wouldn't let me watch Dirty Dancing, and oh, how I wanted to watch it because every other girl had seen it. But she was firm in that, and I had to wait until I was 16 before I could watch it. Once I turned 16, of course, I watched it, and I knew pretty quickly why my mom shielded me from it, but I never voiced that. Really, though, after I turned 16, I started watching anything and everything. I monitored nothing from my eyes. The more trash I watched, the more desensitized to nudity, sex, violence, and sin I became. All these horrible images swirled in my head, but I didn't connect the dots that what I fed my eyes ended up feeding my heart and mind. Now, flash forward about 15 years later, and I was entering the Catholic Church, and I really wanted to grow in my faith. I was like the new nymph that St. Francis talks about, just starting out on my life's journey here. I had cleaned up a lot of what I watched, but I didn't quite think about what I would do if I started watching something that turned out to be bad. So one year, not long after I was a newly minted Catholic, my husband had to go to Vegas for work, and I was able to go with him. We got into town and decided that it would be fun to go see a show down on the Strip. It was a Wednesday evening, so the only Cirque du Soleil shows that were playing were O, Ka, and Zumanity. So my husband called to ask about what the shows entailed. O, we were told, was about a water world, but we knew immediately that it was too expensive. Ka was about martial arts, and Zumanity, we were told, was about animals. I'm not that into martial arts, so I said, let's go see the animal one. So we bought the tickets. Well, as we were standing in line to get into the theater, noticing all the posters and things around us, I leaned over to my husband and said, I don't think this is about animals. Sure enough, we got in, and I knew immediately that this was a very risque show. But I lacked the courage to walk out. My husband and I both lacked the courage, and we sat there the whole time feeding our minds with horrible stuff. Stuff, mind you, that I would have thought nothing of back when I was younger. But now I was more aware of what I should be watching and shouldn't be watching. And still, I lacked the courage to get up and leave. Why? Well, I think a big part of courage is that you have to think about how you will act in certain situations. And obviously, we can't foresee every scenario, and that's ridiculous to think that we can, but I should have thought to myself when I started cleaning up what I allowed my eyes to see. If I ever get into a situation where stuff is bad to view, I will walk out or turn it off. I never had that thought in my mind to think about if I get in a situation where something bad is on TV or it's a bad show or something, what will I do? I just didn't think about it. Sometimes courage must come spontaneously, but sometimes we need to think through how we will respond to things. That night, my husband and I left the theater in silence, stunned by what we had just sat through and feeling just awful and dirty. And I realized that night that I could never let that happen again. And so I gained courage to know what to do in the moment should something like that ever happen again. I grew a little bit in my devotion, like St. Francis talks about with the nymph. They don't start out being able to do everything. They're trying, and they learn as they go. And I learned something valuable that night. And you know what? I've put it into practice since that time, and there have been many times since that point that I have put away, turned off, or walked away from things that were not good for me to watch or read. St. Francis says, quote, "Those idle pleasures and amusements in which your past years were spent will arise before you, tempting your heart to return to them. But have you courage to forfeit an eternity of bliss for such deceitful trifles?" Unquote. Today, I have a lot more courage just because I spend a lot of time thinking about how I will respond in different situations. And we can't beat ourselves up if we do slip up. That's the beauty of the Catholic Church. We're going along on our journey. We're probably going to fall and make a mistake. And once we do, we can go to confession, ask for forgiveness, learn from that, and work really hard not to do it again, and have the courage the next time to say no. So it really does help to think on such things and how we will respond. So that's all for today, Catholic Pilgrims. I'll see you back here soon, and until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.